My friends, we stand at the threshold of a new year, not merely a turn of the calendar, but an invitation to the great work of the soul. To become your best self is not to chase an ideal like a dog snapping at its tail, but to descend into the depths where the self, that eternal golden nucleus of your being, waits. The modern world shouts of hacks and optimization, but the psyche speaks in symbols, dreams, and the slow, organic unfurling of fate. So let us discuss 5 habits, not as petty tricks, but as alchemical rituals to transmute the lead of habit into the gold of awakening. Individuation, as Carl Jung conceived it, is the central process of psychological maturation, a journey toward becoming the fullest, most authentic version of oneself. It is not about achieving some idealized state of perfection, nor is it about conforming to societal expectations of success or virtue. Rather, individuation is the slow, often arduous work of integrating the disparate parts of the psyche, both the conscious and the unconscious, into a harmonious whole. This is not a destination but a continuous unfolding, a dynamic equilibrium, where the ego does not dominate but instead aligns with the deeper, more expansive self, which Jung saw as the true center of the personality. To understand individuation, one must first grasp Jung's model of the psyche. He proposed that the human mind is not a monolithic entity, but a constellation of interacting systems. The ego, the part of us that says I, is just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it lies the personal unconscious, a repository of forgotten memories, repressed desires, and unresolved conflicts. Deeper still is the collective unconscious, a shared psychic inheritance of archetypes, universal patterns of thought and behavior that manifest in myths, dreams, and cultural symbols across time and space. Individuation is the process by which a person brings these hidden layers into conscious awareness, not to eliminate them, but to engage with them, learn from them, and ultimately integrate them into a more complete sense of self. One of the most critical aspects of this process is confronting the shadow, a term Jung used to describe the parts of ourselves that we deny, suppress, or deem unacceptable. The shadow is not inherently evil. It is simply what the ego refuses to acknowledge. It might contain repressed anger, unexpressed creativity, hidden insecurities, or even latent strength that we are afraid to claim. Because the shadow is unconscious, it often projects itself onto others. We see in them the qualities we cannot admit in ourselves. A person who vehemently despises arrogance in others, for example, may be wrestling with their own unrecognized pride. Until we face the shadow, it controls us from the shadows, sabotaging relationships, distorting self-perception, and fueling irrational reactions. Daily self-reflection is a practical habit for engaging with the shadow and advancing individuation. This is not mere surface-level journaling or affirmations, but a disciplined, honest dialogue with the unconscious. One might begin by asking, what emotion or thought did I avoid today? Or when did I react disproportionately? And what might that reveal? The key is to approach these inquiries without judgment, as the ego's tendency to moralize or shame only drives the shadow deeper into hiding. Over time, this practice illuminates the hidden patterns that govern behavior, allowing for greater self-awareness and choice. For instance, someone who habitually people-pleases might discover a buried fear of rejection, rooted in childhood. Recognizing this allows them to respond consciously rather than compulsively. But individuation is not just about confronting the shadow. It is also about embracing the self. Jung's term for the archetype of wholeness, the organizing principle of the psyche that transcends the ego. The self is often symbolized in dreams as a circle, mandala, a wise elder, a divine child, or other images of unity and transformation. Unlike the ego, which is limited and often fearful, the self represents the totality of who we are and who we are becoming. Aligning with the self does not mean eradicating flaws, but recognizing that even contradictions, strength and vulnerability, logic and intuition, chaos and order, are part of a larger, coherent pattern. A daily habit of self-reflection, then, serves 2 purposes. It excavates the shadow, and it cultivates a relationship with the self. One might end each day, not just by reviewing actions, but by asking, where did I feel most alive today? Where did I feel constricted? These questions trace the movements of the self, which often speaks through intuition, synchronicities, and those fleeting moments of rightness that defy logical explanation. Over time, this practice fosters trust in something greater than the ego's plans, a trust that Jung believed was essential for navigating life's uncertainties with resilience and meaning. Individuation is not a solitary endeavor, though it is deeply personal. It requires engaging with the world, through relationships, creative expression, and even conflicts, because the unconscious reveals itself in our interactions. A recurring argument with a partner, a sudden fascination with a myth or symbol, a dream that lingers upon waking, all are grist for the mill of individuation. The goal is not to dissect these experiences into sterile concepts, but to allow them to transform us. For example, a man who dreams of being chased by a monster might initially interpret it as a generic fear, but if he sits with the imagery, he might realize the monster is his own untapped power, which he has feared because it contradicts his self-image as a gentle, accommodating person. Integrating this insight allows him to express assertiveness without guilt, enriching his life and relationships. The paradox of individuation is that it demands both effort and surrender. Effort in the form of disciplined self-inquiry and the courage to face uncomfortable truths. Surrender in the recognition that the psyche has its own wisdom and timing, which cannot be rushed or forced. This is why Jung cautioned against rigid self-improvement schemes that prioritize willpower over wisdom. True growth is organic, like a tree bending toward light while sinking roots into darkness. The shadow, the ego, the self, all are necessary. The goal is not to eliminate the dark parts, but to bring them into relationship so that the psyche becomes a dynamic, fluid whole rather than a battleground of fragments. In practical terms, this means that the path to one's best self is not about adding more achievements, more positivity, more productivity, but about becoming more of what one already is. It is a return, not an ascent. The habits that serve individuation are simple but profound. Pause, reflect, question, listen. Over a lifetime, this process weaves the threads of experience into a tapestry where even the frayed and knotted parts contribute to the beauty of the design. There is no final state of perfection, only the ongoing work of holding the tension between opposites, light and dark, known and unknown, until at moments of grace they reveal themselves as two sides of the same coin. The distinction between a routine and a ritual may seem subtle on the surface, but in the realm of depth psychology, particularly through the lens of Carl Jung, it marks the difference between mechanical repetition and sacred engagement. A routine is something we do to get through the day, to optimize time, to fulfill obligations with minimal friction. It is external, utilitarian, and often soulless. A ritual, however, is something we do to commune with the deeper layers of our being, to infuse the mundane with meaning, to signal to the unconscious that this moment is not like all others. It is set apart, charged with intention. Jung understood that the unconscious does not speak the language of to-do lists or productivity hacks. It communicates through symbols, images, and the numinous, those moments that shimmer with an ineffable sense of the sacred. To create a ritual, not a routine, is to craft a bridge between the ordinary and the extraordinary, a way of inviting the unseen dimensions of the psyche into daily life. Consider the simple act of lighting a candle. In a routine, this might be an automatic gesture, a way to add ambience or soften the lighting in a room. But in a ritual, the candle becomes a living symbol, a tiny sun brought into the domestic sphere, a flickering reminder of the light within. Fire has always been a primal archetype, representing transformation, passion, the divine spark. When you strike the match with awareness, when you pause to watch the flame catch and steady itself, you are not just illuminating a space, you are enacting a microcosm of creation. The unconscious registers this. It does not care how quickly you moved through the motion, or whether you did it perfectly. It responds to the reverence behind the gesture, the silent invocation of something greater than the self. Similarly, brewing tea as a sacrament shifts the act from consumption to communion. In a routine, tea is merely a caffeine delivery system, a means to an end, but in ritual, the process becomes a meditation, the measuring of leaves, the waiting for water to reach its peak boil, the steam rising like incense. The cup becomes a chalice, the act of drinking a way of internalizing warmth, clarity, stillness. This is not about mystifying the everyday, but about recognizing that the everyday is already mystical. The unconscious thrives on these small ceremonies because they mirror the great cycles of nature, the brewing storm, the unfurling leaf, the slow fermentation of time into wisdom. When you approach these acts with presence, you align yourself with these rhythms, and the psyche responds by opening like a flower to the sun. Jung often spoke of the mandala as a symbol of wholeness, a circle that contains and orders chaos. Your morning ritual, no matter how brief, can function as a mandala, a bounded space in which the fragments of the self are gathered and held. Modern life is a centrifugal force, spinning us outward into distraction, fragmentation, endless doing. The ritual is the centripetal counterweight, drawing us back to center. It doesn't require an hour of silent meditation or elaborate preparation. Even 5 minutes, if entered into with full attention, can serve as a portal. The key is the quality of attention, the intention to treat this time as sacred. You might sit by the candle and sip your tea, not planning the day or replaying yesterday's conversations, but simply being there, allowing the mind to settle like sediment in water. In that settling, something deeper may rise, an image, a memory, a whisper of intuition. These are the gifts of the unconscious, offered only when we create space to receive them. The numinous, a term Jung borrowed from theologian Rudolf Otto, is that which is wholly other, the mysterium tremendum et fascinans, the awe-inspiring mystery that both terrifies and enthralls. We associate it with grand experiences, standing under the stars, witnessing a birth, surviving a storm. But the numinous also dwells in the small, the quiet, the seemingly insignificant. A ritual is a way of courting it in the domestic sphere, of saying, I am here, and I am listening. The unconscious responds to this hospitality. It begins to speak, not in words necessarily, but in shifts of mood, in dreams, in sudden insights that arrive like unexpected guests. Over time, these small rituals accumulate into a kind of inner architecture, a structure sturdy enough to bear the weight of life's uncertainties. This is why efficiency is the enemy of ritual. The unconscious cannot be rushed or bargained with. It operates on its own time. When we approach our rituals with the mindset of checking a box, we miss the point entirely. It is better to spend 3 minutes truly present with your tea than 30 minutes going through the motions while scrolling through your phone. The ritual is not about duration but depth, not about doing but being. This is a radical act in a culture that prizes productivity above all else. To sit with a candle and do nothing is, in fact, a quiet rebellion, a reclaiming of the soul from the clutches of the clock. The beauty of this approach is its accessibility. You do not need special tools or training. You only need to decide that this act, whether it's stirring your coffee, stretching your body, or gazing out the window, will be different today. You will do it as if it matters because it does. The unconscious is always watching, always listening. When it sees that you are willing to meet it halfway, to honor the invisible as well as the visible, it begins to cooperate. Synchronicities multiply, dreams deepen, the line between inner and outer soften. What was once a routine becomes a conversation with yourself, with the world, with whatever you might call the divine. Ritual is alchemy in the truest sense. It takes the base metal of habit and transmutes it into gold. The candle is no longer just wax and wick. It is a beacon. The tea is no longer just leaves and water. It is an elixir. The 5 minutes are no longer a pause between tasks. They are a sanctuary, and you are no longer just a person going through the motions of another day. You are a participant in the great mystery, a keeper of the flame, a weaver of meaning. This is the power of ritual. It does not change the world around you so much as it changes the eyes with which you see it, and in that shift, everything is transformed. The concept of synchronicity, introduced by Carl Jung, shatters the conventional understanding of coincidence as mere random chance. Jung proposed that beneath the surface of life's apparent chaos lies a hidden order, a meaningful interplay between inner psychological states and outer events that cannot be explained by cause and effect, but resonates with profound personal significance. When a phrase from a dream reappears verbatim in a conversation the next day, when you think of an old friend only to receive their message moments later, when a series of seemingly unrelated events converge to point unmistakably toward a single theme, These are not glitches in reality, but whispers from a deeper layer of existence. The universe, or what Jung called the self, the archetype of wholeness governing the psyche, communicates through this symbolic language, weaving together the fabric of our inner and outer worlds to guide us toward greater awareness and fulfillment. Synchronicities often appear during periods of transformation, when the psyche is particularly porous to messages from the unconscious. They act as signposts along the path of individuation, offering clues, confirmations, or sometimes warnings when we stray too far from our authentic trajectory. A woman wrestling with whether to leave her corporate job might suddenly encounter the same phrase, "leap and the net," will appear in a novel, a podcast, and a graffiti mural within days. A man hesitant to reconcile with his estranged father might dream of a bridge, then notice bridge imagery recurring in art, news headlines, and even the shape of his morning pastry. These are not supernatural interventions but manifestations of the psyche's innate intelligence, using the external world as a mirror to reflect what we already know at some level, but have not yet brought into conscious awareness. Keeping a synchronicity log is a practical method for decoding this hidden language. Unlike a conventional journal focused on emotions or daily events, this log is a dedicated space for recording moments when the boundary between inner and outer reality seems to dissolve. The act of writing itself is a ritual that signals to the unconscious your willingness to engage, a way of saying, "I am paying attention." Entries need not be elaborate. June 14, hawk circled overhead while I debated taking the job. Later, Sarah mentioned her hawk-eyed mentor, who helped her pivot careers. Over weeks or months, patterns emerge. Perhaps hawks appear during every major crossroads, or the number 27 surfaces before breakthroughs. The symbols are deeply personal. What matters is the resonance they carry for you. The critical next step is interrogation. What is the deeper current trying to carry me toward? This question shifts synchronicity from parlor game curiosity to active dialogue with the self. A hawk might symbolize sharp vision for one person, predatory danger for another. The meaning unfolds through contemplation and feeling, not intellectual analysis. Jungian analyst Marie-Louise von Franz compared synchronicities to dreams that play out in waking life. Their messages are rarely literal, but require the same intuitive unpacking. When a pattern of synchronicities around water emerges for someone afraid of emotional vulnerability, the question isn't "why do I keep seeing rivers?" but "where in my life am I being called to flow rather than resist?" Skeptics dismiss synchronicity as apophenia, the human tendency to perceive connections where none exist. But Jung argued that the very impulse to find meaning is itself meaningful. The psyche's need to weave narratives from disparate threads is not a bug of cognition but a feature of our evolutionary design. Indigenous cultures have long understood this. The Aboriginal concept of dream time or the Yoruba idea of Asirs all describe a reality where inner and outer realms interpenetrate. Modern materialism's insistence on separating observer from observed is the anomaly, not the belief in meaningful coincidence. The practice of attending to synchronicities cultivates a particular quality of attention, one that balances healthy skepticism with open receptivity. It requires discerning between genuine synchronicities and wishful thinking. A true synchronicity carries an electric charge of recognition, a sense of being poked by the universe. It also demands patience. Forcing meaning onto events violates the spirit of the phenomenon. Synchronicities are like wild animals. They appear most readily when we sit quietly in the forest of our lives, not when we crash through the undergrowth demanding revelation. Ultimately, synchronicity invites us into a participatory relationship with existence. When we begin to track and honor these moments, we step out of the default mode of seeing life as a series of random happenings and into the role of co-creator. The self uses synchronicities not to dictate our path, but to nudge us toward our own innate wisdom, the answers we already carry but have been too distracted or fearful to acknowledge. In a world addicted to noise and speed, the practice of listening for these whispers is a radical act of trust in the psyche, in the unseen order of things, and in the unfolding story that is uniquely yours. Carl Jung's concept of archetypes represents one of the most profound contributions to our understanding of the human psyche. These primordial patterns or universal templates exist in the collective unconscious, a deeper layer of the psyche shared by all humanity across cultures and time. Archetypes are not mere intellectual constructs. but living, dynamic forces that shape our thoughts, behaviors, and experiences. They manifest in myths, dreams, art, and religious symbols, appearing as familiar figures like the hero, the wise old man, the trickster, or the eternal child. To dialogue with these archetypes is to engage in a conversation with the accumulated wisdom of the ages, accessing guidance that transcends personal experience and taps into something far more ancient and profound. The practice of dialoguing with archetypes begins with recognition, seeing these universal patterns as active, autonomous aspects of the psyche rather than abstract concepts. When you open your journal at night and address the wise old man, you are not simply imagining a fictional character, but invoking an energy that has existed for millennia, appearing across cultures as the sage, the guru, the mentor, or the grandfather spirit. This archetype embodies wisdom, insight, and the voice of experience. By asking, "What lesson have I not yet learned?" you create a space for this deeper intelligence to speak through intuition, sudden realizations, even the words that flow onto the page as you write. The wise old man does not offer quick fixes or easy answers, but rather mirrors back the truths you may have avoided, the perspectives you have overlooked, and the patience required for genuine growth. Similarly, the eternal child represents the untouched, spontaneous, and creative aspect of the psyche, the part of us that remains curious, playful, and open to wonder. In a world that often demands seriousness and productivity, this archetype is frequently suppressed, leading to a sense of stagnation or joyless routine. When you dialogue with the eternal child, you might ask, "What have I forgotten how to enjoy?" Or "Where have I become too rigid?" The answers may come as memories of long-abandoned passions, a sudden urge to engage in a creative act, or even a subtle shift in mood that lightens the weight of adulthood's responsibilities. The eternal child reminds us that wisdom is not solely the domain of the serious and the somber, but also lives in the capacity to approach life with freshness and imagination. The hero archetype is another powerful ally in this inner dialogue. Unlike the cultural caricature of the hero as merely a conqueror or victor, Jung's hero represents the part of us that faces challenges, overcomes obstacles, and grows through struggle. This archetype is deeply tied to the process of individuation, the journey toward wholeness. When you call upon the hero within, you might ask, "What battle am I avoiding?" Or "Where must I find the courage to take the next step?" The hero does not promise victory, but offers the resilience to endure the journey. This archetype often appears in dreams during times of transition or difficulty, symbolizing the inner strength required to navigate life's trials. By engaging the hero in dialogue, you align yourself with the timeless narrative of transformation, recognizing that your personal struggles are part of a larger, universal story of growth and self-discovery. Archetypes function as psychic organs, essential structures of the collective unconscious that serve vital roles in maintaining psychological equilibrium. Just as the heart, lungs, and liver perform non-negotiable functions for the body, archetypes like the mother, the shadow, or the trickster fulfill irreplaceable roles in the psyche. The mother archetype, for instance, governs nurturance, compassion, and the instinct to protect, while the shadow embodies the repressed, denied, or unacknowledged aspects of the self. The trickster, often misunderstood as merely mischievous, plays the critical role of disrupting complacency, exposing hypocrisy, and forcing adaptability. When we dialogue with these archetypes, we are not merely engaging in a creative exercise, but participating in a form of psychic hygiene, tending to the inner world with the same care we might devote to physical health. The process of archetypal dialogue requires a willingness to suspend disbelief and enter into a state of active imagination, a technique Jung developed to facilitate communication between the conscious mind and the unconscious. This is not about conjuring fantasies, but about allowing the archetypes to speak in their own voices, free from the ego's censorship or manipulation. You might begin by visualizing the archetype as a figure in your mind's eye, then posing a question and writing down whatever arises without judgment or interference. Over time, these dialogues develop a rhythm and depth, as the archetypes reveal aspects of yourself that were previously hidden or underdeveloped. The wise old man might point out a blind spot in your decision-making. The eternal child might draw attention to neglected joys. The hero might challenge you to face a fear you've been avoiding. What makes this practice so potent is its universality. Archetypes transcend individual personality, connecting us to the broader human experience. When you dialogue with the mother archetype, you are tapping into the same energy that has inspired goddess worship, maternal instincts, and cultural ideals of caregiving across millennia. When you engage the trickster, you are dancing with the same force that appears in myths as Loki, Hermes, or the Native American coyote, an energy that defies rigid structures and invites flexibility. This universality means that archetypal dialogue is not a solitary endeavor, but a participation in something far greater than the individual self. You are, in effect, joining a conversation that has been ongoing since the dawn of human consciousness. The lessons gleaned from these dialogues are rarely straightforward. Archetypes speak in symbols, metaphors, and paradoxes, requiring interpretation and reflection. A conversation with the shadow might reveal a dream about being chased, which could symbolize avoidance of a difficult truth. The wise old man might respond to your question with a riddle rather than a direct answer, prompting deeper contemplation. This indirect communication is intentional. The unconscious does not operate like the logical, linear conscious mind, but communicates through the language of images and feelings. The work lies in learning to translate these messages, much as one might learn to decipher a foreign tongue. Engaging with archetypes also carries a caution. These forces are powerful, and not all are benign. The shadow, for example, can overwhelm if confronted too abruptly, flooding the conscious mind with repressed material before it is ready to integrate it. The hero's energy, if unbalanced, can veer into grandiosity or relentless striving at the expense of self-care. This is why Jung emphasized the importance of approaching archetypal work with respect and preparation, ideally with the guidance of therapy or a grounded spiritual practice. Archetypes are not toys but potent energies that demand maturity and discernment in their engagement. Over time, the practice of archetypal dialogue fosters a richer, more nuanced relationship with the self. The ego learns that it is not the sole authority, but one participant in a larger psychic ecosystem. This realization is humbling but also liberating. It means you are never truly alone in your struggles. The wisdom of the ages is accessible within you, waiting to be consulted. The courage of the hero, the insight of the wise old man, the creativity of the eternal child, these are not distant ideals but living presences that can inform your daily life. In a world that often prioritizes external achievement over inner exploration, archetypal dialogue offers a counterbalance, a way to mine the depths of your own psyche for guidance, healing, and inspiration. The questions you pose to these inner figures are less important than the act of asking itself, for it is in the asking that you acknowledge there is more to you than the surface personality. The answers may come immediately or unfold gradually, in dreams, synchronicities, or sudden flashes of understanding. What matters is that you have opened the door, invited the archetypes to speak, and listened with an open mind. In doing so, you honor the ancient timeless dimensions of your being, and take your place in the ongoing human journey toward wholeness. And so, my friends, we arrive at the heart of the matter. The sacred work of becoming, to walk the path of your best self, is not to chase an illusion of perfection, but to engage in the ancient art of soul-making. Through shadow work, you reclaim lost fragments of yourself. Through ritual, you transform the ordinary into the sacred. Through synchronicity, you learn to read the hidden language of the universe. And through dialogue with archetypes, you converse with the eternal voices of wisdom that dwell within you. This is not a journey of quick fixes, but of slow, deliberate unfolding, a lifelong dance between the seen and unseen, the known and unknown. As you step forward into 2025, remember, the greatest transformations often begin in the smallest moments. A single candle lit with intention, a dream recorded at dawn, a question whispered to the night. These are the seeds of profound change. May your year be rich with meaning, your path illuminated by synchronicity, and your courage fortified by the wisdom of your inner guides. Trust the process. You are not merely building a better life, you are remembering who you have always been. Thank you for walking this journey of exploration with me. Now, go forth, not with luck, but with the unshakable knowing that the universe conspires in your awakening.